Well, as mentioned at the top of the show, our very special guest this morning is Doug Green. Now, you might know him as Ranger Doug from Riders in the Sky. And not only do they have a new album out, they got all kinds of stuff. And first of all, it's just a pleasure to see you. And I've been smiling from ear to ear listening to the new album. I got to tell you, nothing makes me happier than Western swing and yodeling. And it just brings out the child, I think, in all of us.
Well, thank you, and good morning to you, Peter. Actually, it's our 42nd album.
Oh, my God. You're up there with Sinatra and whomever.
Yeah, whoever. Yeah.
So this venture of yours has, I'll say adventure, but it's also a business venture as well. It's been going on since, I'd say, about 77, was it?
Yes, November 11th, 1977 was when Too Slim and myself and a guy named Bill Collins played our first little date at Herr Harry's Franks and Stein's on Lyle and Broadway.
That sounds a bit like a dicey joint.
It was not the classiest one in town, I will say that, but a lot of songwriters and stuff played there. It was one of those little rooms.
And here you come with, out of left field for sure. At that time, though, I think people might have been even more receptive than they've been. Now and then it comes back. But a lot of times in the 70s, people were doing things, I will call it ironically. Like when I wore a Mickey Mouse shirt, it wasn't because I went to Disneyland. It was because I was a little pothead at 19. and I thought, oh, this is funny, you know.
Uh-huh. Right.
But likewise, steel guitars and country fiddles and all of the jolly aspects of country music, I've always felt were what first got country rock its kickstart, because people were right around 1969, 70, 68, all there. That was kind of, you go to the Fillmore East, you're game for anything. And if Poco's opening the show for Humble Pie or somebody, you're like, wow, that Poco was really fun. That other thing, I don't know.
Yeah, you make a very good point. I think it was a creative time and an open time for acoustic and semi-acoustic music and roots music, traditional music. People were accepting and interested in stuff that wasn't mainstream.
Well, back in the day, when the Sons of Pioneers were doing it, and incidentally, folks, you might not know who they are, and you might not even know who Roy Rogers is, but he was in them. And
he started it.
I mean, it's just amazing to me that you've carried on in that particular niche, a tradition it's a narrow lane. There aren't many people doing it. We had Western swing bands like Asleep at the Wheel and just a few others. Dan Hicks might be in that category a little.
Alvin Crow.
Yeah, but at some point you devoted yourself to this. What was the genesis for Doug Green about Western swing? Was it just an opportunity that you saw that the lane was clear for that?
No, it wasn't that calculating at all. I never dreamed at the start that we would really make a living at this. I mean, it seemed impossible, but it was beautiful music I'd grown up with. Two of my uncles played guitar, and when my dad was in the Navy, we lived in Southern California. And in those days, you know, the Western varieties, and Sheriff John was on the TV, and Town Hall Party, and there was that was the music of my childhood. And 1974, I went to a concert. It was billed as a Western Swing Festival, but the Sons of the Pioneers were there. And I said, after a whole day of beer drinking music, to have them come out and sing about Way Out There and the Timber Trail and Tumbling Tumbleweeds and all these songs that glorify the beauty of the West and the outdoor life, I said, man, that's for me. That's what I remember about being a kid. Like you said, it brings out something childlike in you. And it does. It does for our audience, and it does for all of us.
When you're a kid, especially, the first time you hear somebody yodel, I mean, that's like a cartoon coming alive in the form of a human being. And I think you guys still specialize in bringing the cartoon. And I don't mean it as a laugh at or even laugh with. It's just we're all in this together, and isn't life silly? And let's have some silly fun.
Yes, indeed. My Uncle Arvid yodeled, so I knew about it growing up. And then I found that during the big folk scare of the 60s that if you could yodel, girls paid attention. So I developed it. And then I ran into a guy named Elton Britt on record. I never met Elton, but he's my yodeling guru, my hero.
Wow. And he was probably like the master of all these. He had subtle techniques that...
Oh, boy, he had technique. He really had technique. To your point about cartoon, as part of our show, when we can, we show a cartoon. We show For the Birds, the Academy Award-winning musical short that started before Monsters Incorporated. We played the music on that soundtrack.
Wow, I did not know that.
So we play the music live and show the animated short or cartoon.
Well, we're talking with Cranbrook High School grad Ranger Doug.
Yes, you are.
He's wearing a sweatshirt from his high school. That stuff never leaves. And I think the childlike quality, that the optimism that the music holds, there's something about bringing a smile to people that's even deeper than being, let's say, a stand-up comedian and getting belly laughs. You walk away, you leave that stage, and everyone in the audience their cheeks hurt from smiling.
Yeah, it's a very uplifting music because it's about the outdoors, and it's not about cheating spouses and getting drunk, and it's not about any of that. It's about the optimistic side of life, and I think that's why people like even the slow songs, even the sad ones. Then we turn around to do something fast and funny, and it's a full experience to see the whole show.
I actually think the music itself, you could put almost any lyrics to that music, and it's just a jolly sound. It's got a lilt to it that if, not everyone starts out dialed in at the beginning of your show. But once they lock in, you've almost got syncopated reactions.
Well, you're kind of right about that. Let me go through who everybody is in the group for you.
Yeah, there's not too many guys named Too Slim.
No, there's not. If you remember back to the 70s, there was a guy called Too Tall Jones that played for Tennessee State, and then he went on to become a pro football player. And so Too Slim was very skinny at that time, and he took Too Slim, just as you say, an ironic name. He plays the bass. He's our funny guy.
And he can eat all the cheeseburgers he wants, because if he's a little heavier, it's still ironic.
Well, he says he's become just right. Woody Paul joined us after just a couple of months.
How did he get his nickname?
He just came up with it himself. His real name is Paul, and
Moody.
And people call him Woody.
Oh, Woody Paul.
Yeah.
I thought you said Moody.
No. Although you could make that case, but
sorry, Paul.
And his middle name is Woodrow, so that's why people called him Woody. And about 10 years later, then after that, we found a guy under a freeway underpass with a sign that said, "We'll squeeze for food." So we added Joey the Cowpolka King on accordion.
And the accordion is terrific on this new album.
He's brilliant.
Now, the title of the album
is Throw a Saddle on a Star.
Well, if you're just tuning in, good morning, and you are in luck. Our very special guest this morning is Ranger Doug from Riders in the Sky. And there are, I'm sure, many groups here and there, in various spots around the country and around the world that do this sort of music, but they're few and far between. And I'd have to say, for me, the number one totem, the group that really signifies harmonies and yodeling and the Western sound as it was in the swing era, is really Riders in the Sky. And, they've been together since 1977, and they're still just going all over the world and filling houses, and those houses get filled with smiles. At some point, maybe just 5 years after you formed, you became regulars and then members of the Grand Ole Opry. And it's interesting how humbly you portray that on your own website, Riders in the Sky, because it's something where you say, well, there weren't many acts in that lane, and so, but I suspect they would have come to you at some point, no matter what, because no one else does this, and it is part of country music.
Yeah. If you think of the American, well, country music is a slice of the American musical pie, and Western music a tiny slice of country music and of the American musical pie.
Yeah.
And there aren't many of us out there doing it. Happy to say the Sons of the Pioneers are still going strong after almost 90 years. And not the same original members, of course, but...
and here's our 110-year-old guitar player.
Rogers. But as you say, there's not many of us out there doing this.
You know, growing up in New York on Long Island, not a place known for, cowboys and Indians, but you're a kid in the 50s. That was a big deal. Westerns were a big deal,
yeah.
And Roy Rogers and Dale Evans, who was another talent, by the way, they were heroes for kids everywhere. Yeah. And it's hard probably for kids to remember that now. I mean, a 7-year-old today might be looking at Snoop Dogg as a hero. We don't know.
Yeah.
But Roy Rogers was a big deal, and I don't remember hearing him yodel very much. It was more a folksy kind of half an hour show that he and his wife did, and they'd present other people once in a blue moon maybe. And when you heard it, it sure perked your ears up. You went, what?
Well, Gene Autry, when he had his TV series for 3 years, I think, he had a musical selection every show. But when Roy did his half-hour show, they didn't sing. They just sang Happy Trails at the end.
That's right.
And then he had a variety show later, and that's where you would have heard him yodel.
And the comfort factor, I think, is another thing, because, it's Roy Rogers really preceded, for me, Mr. Rogers. There was by the end of that hour when they're singing softly Happy Trails to You, there's something very, very similar to the way Fred Rogers made us all feel.
Yeah, Roy had that gentle personality. He could be tough when he needed to on camera, but he just exuded this kindness. Yeah. And in person, we found it to be exactly like that.
The one thing I discovered listening to the album a couple of times this morning before we got together is that there's a bonus track on this record with the Riders in the Sky and Roy Rogers. Now, obviously, Roy's not here today to protest. No, but no. He was in town, I guess, in the early '90s for a spell. And you did this maybe at the Grand Ole Opry?
No, we did it on Hee Haw.
Wow, terrific! And it's a wonderful performance.
Yeah.
And what a perfect blend! It makes perfect sense. Did he sing lead on it?
Yeah. And what was so fun about it is we were back. Well, the first time we played with him, I'll say this was the second time we had played with him. But the first time we played with him, he was dragging a little bit, and just saying he'd been backed up by country bands for 10, 15, 20 years, And he got up. He said, "Well, you guys know Skyball Paint?" "Well, of course we know Skyball Paint." And we started playing. Right. I went, "Well, you know Texas Plains?" "Oh, of course we know Texas Plains." And he lost 10 years in age, and he stood up straighter and smiled. He said, "This is just like when I started with Bob and Tim back in 1934 and 5.
Bob being Bob Nolan of the Sons of the Pioneers, whom you actually kind of idolized?
Yes, I would say so. Certainly, he and Tim Spencer were the original brilliant songwriters of the genre.
And some of the songs they wrote are standards or classics to this day. I mean, even transcending the genre a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Tumblin' Tumbleweeds is a...
Cool Water, Room Full of Roses, Everlasting Hills of Oklahoma. It goes on and on and on.
I'm telling you, it's just a treasure. And you were showing me earlier a handwritten letter that you have from Bob Nolan himself.
Yes, I've talked with him on the phone and asked him if he was notably a recluse. I mean, he didn't get out much, or he didn't care to. But he
didn't seek the spotlight.
No, not after he retired. But I asked him if he would write the liner notes for our first record. I sent him a tape of it, and he fell in love with it. And so he wrote this beautiful set of liner notes that it was very moving to us. And it also gave us, it's one of those early things in your career when the old timers might say, well, who are these guys kidding? These kids don't have what we did. But no, he was exactly the opposite. He was, this is great. You're keeping it alive. And I heard that over and over from Eddie Dean and Jimmy Wakely and all those movie stars that I grew up, idolizing. They all said, come on, boys, youngsters getting into it. And it was a real validation.
It's interesting that when I was, I'll say a kid, but I was married. I was in my mid-20s in Boulder. And I would always go to this little place called Look Photo. There was a guy named Don Look. Mm-hmm. And he, in the back room, he taught me a lot about photography. I mean, I brought him pictures I took, and he said, okay, I'd fire you if you crop this way. That's not how this goes. But in the back room, he had, I believe, one of the world's largest collections of original movie posters from theaters of Western movies from that referenced Colorado. Oh, and they're innumerable. There were a lot of them. Yeah. And I'm sure Don's gone by this day, but I sometimes see those posters in connection with this type of music. Mm-hmm.
Well, yes. I mean, it was big business back in those days.
And sometimes they would feature a song or somebody by a campfire doing something similar. Were you where you grew up watching Westerns all the time?
Sure, of course. It was the 50s, naturally.
We're talking with Ranger Doug here on WXNA, and we'll be back to talk some more. And that's the immortal Gene Autry. He did pretty well for himself. Ended up buying the San Diego Padres, I believe, and half of Southern California. Some of these cowboy guys, think about this. I mean, their empires. I used to live in Santa Barbara, right near the Fess Parker Resort, which is right down there in Montecito and right on the water, the best parcels of land. And he owns all the stuff all the way up towards Neverland, where Michael Jackson was. But these guys were richer than Michael. I mean, for their time. And of course, Fess Parker played Daniel Boone and Davy Crockett. And every kid in the 50s had a coonskin hat. Every kid had to have one. So you can still see the traces of the cowboy ethic and how much they revered the land, because most of them really just decided to invest in it. We're talking with Ranger Doug of Riders in the Sky this morning, and believe it or not, he brought his, looks like D28 to me.
It is. It is indeed.
And what year would that be? I think for our guitar aficionados, they want to know all the time.
1949.
I had a 71, which I bought new for $3.99 with the case back then. And, the minute I got it, all the guitar, experts were like, oh, too bad. You didn't get the 70 because they changed everything. And I'm like, yeah, shut up. I'm happy with this.
My parents got me a Harmony Sovereign for Christmas one year, and I went out the next year, and I believe I was a senior in high school, and found this at Earl Gourmet's Pick and Strum Shop in Greenfield, Michigan. And so he had a brand new Martin for $275. And I said, well, is there anything else? And he said, well, I've got one in the back that's really beat up, and you could have it for $265. I said, oh yeah, and I bought it.
Did you know at that time that probably an older one would be a better thing?
I did. I was that savvy at that point.
Wow. Yeah.
And I still have it.
All right. Well, this is Ranger Doug on WXNA LP Nashville Live.
This is a tune from the brand new album, and I wrote it during the pandemic. Story song of long ago. 'Neath the spreading magnolia in the Tennessee hills, two young lovers talking as young lovers will. They exchanged golden lockets, for his orders had come to ride to the west with the cavalry's best to the beating of drum. Oh, my roamer and dreamer, is this what you must do to make war on the native who's done no harm to you? My duty is clear, love, he replied with a sigh, but your locket of gold I will treasure and hold. And they kissed one last time. Now there's usually an instrumental break in here, but seeing as how I'm all alone, we'll just go into the next verse. Two columns of riders and a short mule-drawn train, specks on the horizon of that broad western plain, set on by Comanches by a bright riverside, till that river ran red with the blood of the dead and the dying who cried. Yes, Captain, I'm dying, he whispered in pain, handing over his locket on that wild, bloody plain. Take this back to my one love, back in old Tennessee, where she waits for me there with a flower in her hair 'neath a magnolia tree.
It's Ranger Doug live on WXNA LP Nashville, and we'll be back to talk some more. Having a blast this morning. Ranger Doug from Riders in the Sky. I mentioned the Time Jumpers only because we are Nashville-based here, but for those of you outside of Nashville, you might have zero idea about that. But if you ever do take a tour to Nashville or a trip, as so many do these days, well, leave the bachelorettes out of it, but try and get over and see the Time Jumpers. Have you had that happen where the more or less rowdy or disruptive tourists come in with no interest in the music?
Very rarely. Well, and so rarely that it really stands out just one or two times. Usually people are there for every Monday night at the
3rd and Lindsley, right?
Yeah.
And I can give you the address. It's 3rd and Lindsley. And but they have a terrific show, and I think it might be up to $20 now, but that's a bargain. Trust me. You can't get a concert ticket for under $100 anywhere, and that's what you'd pay if you went to see them at the Grand Ole Opry. So be advised, this is an inside straight. It's a tip from a townie here. They still pack the house, the Time Jumpers do. And Riders in the Sky, do you guys tour maybe a few months a year, or do you take a full, like, half the year type thing?
No, we just take anything that comes along. We take a couple weeks off at Christmas time and a week off in the summer to go to the beach with our grandkids now. It used to be kids. And that's about it. Otherwise, we're available. We just got back from 11 days in California, and that really went well. Great crowds. They're enthusiastic bunch out there.
It's interesting that you've kept alive this music that it kind of feels like very, very few people do. You know, keep it as faithful to the sound. And as a kid, I can remember, again, up on Long Island, being completely fascinated by anybody who could yodel or do any of that. And you're pretty much a certified expert yodeler.
Yeah.
That must have not come in handy on first dates.
I don't know. It's pretty much the history-proven chick magnet of all time, as far as I can tell.
This man speaks from experience, folks. It's always a surprise to me, even though I know what's coming sometimes, the uplift you get. I'm imagining that you guys get it every time, too, or you wouldn't be doing this.
Oh, yeah. That's the whole reason we do it. It's just that pulse you get from the audience. Make them laugh, make them have fun, let them get sentimental about the Old West, and then turn right around and make them laugh.
What a fascinating journey to have the irony wash away because the music is so freaking excellent.
Well, we knew from the very start, we were very conscious that if we weren't really good musicians and doing the music total justice, that it would come out looking sophomoric, like a college spoof. So if you're going to do left field comedy like we do, I mean, it's out there sometimes. If you're going to do that, you better have the musicianship right behind you to establish your credentials as people who take this music very seriously and love it.
Now I'm kind of curious. I've seen you play with players of all stripes, all kinds, and but what sort of outside music, not in that genre, does Ranger Doug stick on in the Jag?
Well, being a rhythm guitar player, and specializing in just rhythm guitar, naturally, Count Basie and Freddie Green, my total hero on the guitar. I listen to a lot of Count Basie just to see what Freddie's doing.
What would be the period of time? Count Basie spans decades and decades. What would be the place where we would look for that?
Well, Freddie played with him for like 40-some years, so you don't hear him that much in the late 30s, early 40s recordings. But about in the middle 50s, that guitar suddenly became the heartbeat of that band. And people described it as a mixture of a Cadillac and a Mack truck. And part of that Mack truck was Freddie's incredibly propulsive guitar playing. Which
probably inspired Count Basie's kind of minimalist period where he could lay back and be behind the beat and just kind of tinkle, but it wasn't tinkling, it was expertise, to the 10th power.
It's sort of, people ask, about it because I'm so married to the D string, and because that's where the sonic tone is heard. You hear the guitar. Otherwise, if you're too low, if you're playing a great big fat chord, you're playing that G note 3 times in that one chord. You don't need that. You just need... And that's what Freddie Green did. That was his genius to bring that single and double note rhythm style to big band.
Wow.
And that's what I try to bring to the Time Jumpers.
Wow, that's terrific. Again, they're there at 3rd and Lindsley every Monday night. I guess they start about 8 now. It used to be 9, but we're all getting old.
That's exactly right. With the Riders, of course, I play more like 3-note chords because the guitar needs to fill more space in a 4-piece band.
Talking with Ranger Doug from Riders in the Sky. Peter Rodman here, going off with you this and every Monday morning from 10 to 11 Central Time. As long as this band's been around, you've been almost every other day at the Grand Ole Opry, and these are packed houses. This is not a little, pin money. I think you guys have really reached as high a pinnacle as ever.
Well, we've been getting standing ovations at the Opry. We're still doing tour dates, even though we're all in our 70s now, and still enjoying performing for people. We've played over 7,800 shows, and we'll keep going till we get to 8,000 and see what we do there.
And that was just December.
Yeah, right. Sometimes it feels like it.
Well, Riders in the Sky are wonderful, and Ranger Doug, you've been very generous with your time and patient with my nutty questions, and I certainly appreciate it, and I hope you'll come back and see us again sometime.
Well, that would be a great pleasure. I'd love to.
Ranger Doug on WXNA LP, Nashville.